Have you ever heard of Rolex, Omega, Patek Philippe or Tissot? Well, all these brands and many more make up the lucrative Swiss watch industry. And don't be mistaken, the Swiss watch industry isn't just some fringe economic sector that produces little to no value to the Swiss economy. With its brands shifting more than 20 million units annually, the Swiss watch industry is much more important than you may think. But what is it that makes Swiss watches so special? And how important is the Swiss watch industry to Switzerland's economy? Well, in this Economics in Action video, we're going to find out, starting with a little bit of the industry's history. Watches began being produced in Switzerland as far back as the mid-16th century, predominantly in and around the city of Geneva, a few decades after the very first watch was invented in 1505 by a German in Germany. Back then, Switzerland wasn't the watch-producing nation we know today. In fact, that position was held by its larger European peers, such as Germany, France, and England. And the watches that Switzerland were producing weren't high-end luxury timepieces, much like the watches we are familiar with today. Instead, they were actually cheap knockoffs of their European counterparts. For the industry at the time, it was quantity over quality. And to be fair, this strategy had worked well for the Swiss. By the 19th century, the Swiss watch industry had grown so much that it was producing more than 2 million watches a year, far more than its nearest competitor, England, which was producing around 200,000 timepieces. With such a surge in watchmakers also came an increase in those wanting to produce a timepiece of higher quality to separate themselves from the other Swiss watchmakers. This led to innovation in technology, which saw the first waterproof watch being sold by Rolex in 1926, known as the Oyster. Throughout the rest of the 20th century, the Swiss watch industry proved to be resilient despite large falls in demand as a result of the Great Depression and 2 world wars, in which Switzerland, despite being in the center of the whole mess, managed to come out relatively fine. More recently, in the 1970s and 80s, the Swiss watch industry seemed to jump off a cliff as Japanese watchmakers posed a serious threat with the cheaper Japanese quartz watch that resulted in the industry back in Switzerland almost halving its workforce. But once again, the Swiss watch industry innovated and hit back with its own quartz Swiss watches that seemed to revitalize the industry and have proven to be important in the watch industry up until today. So, how big is the Swiss watch industry? Does data about the Swiss watch industry live up to its impressive global reputation? As of 2019, the Swiss watch industry exported 21.7 billion Swiss francs worth of watches, registering a 2.4% increase on 2018's figure, with the primary export markets being Hong Kong, the USA, China, Japan, and the UK. In fact, the Asian continent is by far the largest market for the Swiss watch industry, accounting for 53% of all exports, with the European market a distant second. Despite the value of exports increasing by 2.4% in 2019, the number of units actually fell and did so pretty drastically, from 23.7 million units in 2018 to 20.6 million in 2019. This ranked Switzerland third globally with regards to the production of watches, ahead of Germany and the USA, but drastically behind China, which produced a staggering 644.3 million units in 2019. Amazingly, despite the absurd quantity of watches that are produced in China, the Swiss are the ones who have the final laugh. You see, that's because despite the Chinese producing more than 31 times more watches than the Swiss generated more than 4 times the revenue. This is all possible thanks to the fact that the Swiss have focused primarily on the luxury market, whereas the Chinese have not. In fact, the average price of a Swiss watch sold in 2019 was $998 compared to China's $4. That means that just under 250 average-priced Chinese watches are the equivalent to their Swiss counterpart. Okay, so it's pretty evident that the Swiss watch industry is rather unique. It is a big moneymaker that pushes far above its weight and is therefore very impressive. But what does this all mean for the Swiss economy? We know that Switzerland is a rich country, but does its watch industry play a significant role in its own exports? Exports from Switzerland totaled $314.1 billion in 2019, a slight increase on the previous year. Of that, 6.9% were clocks, watches, and other watch components, ranking the industry as the fifth largest export industry in Switzerland. Not bad at all. And the Swiss watch industry gets even more impressive when we consider that the industry is a net exporter. That's to say, the Swiss export a greater value of watches than they import. The Swiss watch industry ranks as the second largest net exporting industry in Switzerland, just behind the pharmaceutical industry, bringing in $18 billion a year. This statistic is a result of the international reputation and reach of Swiss watches, while being home to a relatively small market of just 8.6 million people, meaning that the watch industry pushes far above its weight. As for jobs, according to the Swiss Federal Council, 59,000 people were employed in the watchmaking industry in 2015. So, if you find yourself walking down a street in Switzerland and pass 100 people, one of those people will work in the watchmaking industry. But all these numbers aside, the Swiss watch industry does contribute to Switzerland in another way, and that's with its reputation. You see, in 2020, Swiss watches are well established as luxury items, a high-quality product in which its makers pay an extreme amount of attention to detail. This sentiment of high quality is exported not just within the final product of a Swiss watch, but also on the Swiss-made label that accompanies it. And it is this Swiss-made reputation that the Swiss watch industry exports as well that brings benefits to other parts of the Swiss economy. It allows for other sectors to take advantage of this internationally established reputation and protects them from emerging markets that produce low quality and cheaper products, as the international consumer assumes that a Swiss-made product is by nature of higher quality than that from another country. However, it isn't all sunshine and roses for the Swiss watch industry. In recent years, it has found itself under pressure from a certain company. Back in 2015, some big tech company from California launched a watch. This watch was a smartwatch, and we know it today as the Apple Watch. Despite being only 5 years old, the Apple Watch has been a huge success, and it has caused some back in Switzerland to begin to sweat. You see, as of 2019, Apple sold 31 million of these smartwatches, more units than the whole Swiss watch industry, and some have been speculating about whether Apple is killing the Swiss watch industry. After all, the Apple Watch is a modern digital watch that allows you to do much more than just tell the time. It can monitor your health and notify you about being messaged. But that's not really the point. You see, owning an Apple product, much like being in possession of a Swiss watch or winning an argument in the YouTube comment section, is a social statement in addition to being a high-quality product. And therefore, Apple may attract the younger, tech-savvy consumer who would prefer a flashy, colourful high-tech watch over a Swiss watch that contains a diamond. That said, there are many that argue that despite the success of the Apple Watch, the Swiss watch industry isn't going anywhere, and that this is yet another disruption to the market that the Swiss will be able to deal with. They argue that Swiss watches will still be in demand as a staple of luxury and a status symbol, far classier than that of Apple's smartwatch. They mention that Swiss watches have already stood the challenge of time. A Swiss watch that's 10 years old does not drop in value both socially and economically, like that of the Apple Watch, and therefore the Swiss watch industry will prevail. The Swiss watch industry is without a doubt an impressive industry that perhaps is so perfectly suited to the rich mountainous nation of Switzerland. It's not the largest of the watch industries, but it outperforms all. Its luxurious and exclusive reputation is admirable, and its newest challenge with the rise of the smartwatch may be here to stay. But the victor of this battle with disruptive technologies will only be revealed in due time. Hi everyone, thanks for listening to another video here on the Economics in Action channel. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you enjoyed this video. It helps me out a lot, it shows the YouTube algorithm who's boss, and it helps me sleep at night. Take care, bye.